Well, good evening, everyone. Both those who are gathered here in the building and those who are joining us on YouTube. Welcome to our keynote address by the Very Reverend Gary Paterson. Gary was moderator of the United Church from 2012 to 2015. I first heard Gary when he appeared at the Banff Men's Conference while he was moderator and decided to share with all the men at Banff Men's Conference the story of Scaredy Squirrel. Which was certainly a change from what they were used to, I'm quite sure. Gary was also the keynote speaker after he was moderator at the Banff Men's Conference, which that year was held in Canmore, I believe, the Banff Men's Conference in Canmore. Gary's been involved with the question and the discussion around sexuality in the United Church pretty much as long as we've been talking about it. I'll try not to tell you that that's been 40 years or so, but it's been a while. He was the first openly gay moderator elected within the United Church of Canada. His partner was the first openly gay man ordained after the 1988 decision. So Gary's got lots of experience in discussions around human sexuality and the questions that brings particularly to the church. He's probably heard more than many of us would like to have heard. After Gary speaks, there will be a time for question and answer. We have a mic here. As you came in, you were also given pieces of paper, so you can either write down a question and pass them off, and I or somebody else will read them on your behalf, or you can come to the mic. While the audio from the mic for the question and answer will be on YouTube, we don't have a camera setting which actually covers where the mic is, so you actually won't be on. If you're on YouTube and you have a question you wanted to pass on for the question and answer session, use the live chat function. I will be monitoring that, and we'll share any questions that come through in that way. On behalf of the Affirm team here at St. Paul's, I do welcome you again to our gathering. And at this point, I would invite Gary to come share his words of wisdom on a journey of affirmation.
Okay. Thanks very much, Gord. And it is just delightful to be here with you. And if people are at the back and would feel comfortable moving to the front half of the church. When I first started ministry at St. Andrews Wesley, it was the Cathedral-esque church downtown, and it had room originally for 1,500 people. Some pew removal had got it down to 1,200, and when I first arrived, there were only 100, and they all liked to sit in the back 3 pews. So you felt as if you were shouting or rolling a bowling ball and down there to see if it could actually connect. So I am actually very delighted to be with you here at St. Paul's United in Grand Prairie. This is a first for me to be north of Edmonton. Well, not quite, because I did go to visit Fort McMurray when I was moderator and we were wrestling with environmental and oil sands questions. But this was just a wonderful opportunity, and I think I primarily want to start almost by congratulating St. Paul's and the Affirming Committee for the kind of work that you are doing. It is so, so important. And although things have changed over the last several decades and life is easier for the LGBTQ plus community, nevertheless, there are still big issues. And I think the United Church has been a pioneer in the movement of acceptance of communities that were so often rejected or on the edge. But you need to recognize that the larger body of Christianity is still not there. For the Roman Catholic Church, with 1.3 billion worshipers, LGBT people are considered disordered intrinsically, like you haven't got a hope when you start. The various branches of the Orthodox faith don't even want to talk about it, period. For the charismatics and evangelicals of a conservative bent and the Pentecostals, well, we're just going straight to hellfire. And you've seen some of what's happening south of the border. So the work that is being done here at St. Paul's is crucial and important and a wonderful way of trying to affirm God's love. Now, it wasn't clear to me what would be most helpful to talk about tonight, so I decided to cover the entire gamut. Of course, why use one word when 10 will do? But I also recognize that often the shortest distance between two people, between me and you, is story. Something that is grounded, that is rich, that is something we can all connect with. And so, just to begin, I would like to take you back, some 50, almost 60 years, and you need to imagine me as no white hair, and I'm just a budding teenager, and all my adolescent hormones are swirling all around. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I suddenly recognize that I seem to be attracted to other guys. This is a horrific discovery. Not something where I go, rah, rah, gay is good. I'm living in a time when everybody else in my friendship circle is talking about their crushes on girls, and they're my best friends, but they're not people that I'm attracted to. And I'm so worried. You need to picture me going down to the local library and trying to nonchalantly walk through the Dewey Decimal System and look at the 2 to 300 point something group. But could I check out a book that had the word homosexual on the front? No. So I would surreptitiously open and think, oh, no, I won't do that at all. But when I started to look a little further, I realized that the government, the state, said that I was a criminal. The whole medical establishment in Canada and elsewhere in the world said that I was sick. And the church was not going to talk about homosexuality, but when it actually did say something, it was clear that I was a sinner and I was going to hell. And when I did a little bit of research, I recognized that it was in 1960 that our Blessed United Church said that homosexuality is a sin and not compatible with the will of God. And that sort of was the last nail in my coffin. So you need to imagine me in prayer to God saying, please fix me. Please fix me, because the rest of my life seems really good, but I don't want to be homosexual. And here I am, some 50, 60 years later, and gay as a goose, and incredibly happy, but a huge journey and a lot of change. And I share this with you because although I know there has been an enormous change in our culture, in our country, in our context, I want to tell you that LGBTQ2S young people are still struggling. Yes, there are resources, there are support groups, there are gay-straight alliances in school, there are affirming congregations, but almost every individual that comes to that moment of saying, I think I'm gay, or I'm lesbian, or I'm bi, or I'm trans, or I'm queer, exploring, or I'm not sure what, but something's different, that person worries. How do you actually share that news with your friends, with your fellow church people, if you're involved in church life, with your family, with your parents, with your siblings? What are you going to do? And young people still are carrying that worry. Did you know that the suicide rate for LGBTQ youth is 3 times higher than their straight equivalents? Teens are always struggling. Adolescence is not an easy time. You're trying to figure out who you are, what you're all about, and what's your relationship with parents. But when you add on this huge concern about sexual orientation, your stress levels go way up. And they are actually depending on people like us who will be saying, welcome, or God's love is for everyone, or there is no hate in this place. Someone that they might be able to talk to. You need to look and think that 5% or 10% of the children in your Sunday school, the kids in your youth group, are very possibly LGBTQT. Maybe. The actual statistic, nobody really knows. It goes anywhere from 10 to 3%. You look at the hockey team, the soccer team, the baseball team, 5% of those kids are probably struggling with questions of orientation and gender identity. And they need people like us to be present and to be available. Now, I know that this is a church talk, but I actually want to give a little bit of cultural political and medical background, because on my journey I had to wrestle with, I'm not a criminal, I am not sick, and I am not a sinner. You may not know that in 1967, a chap from Edmonton, George Clifford Everett, moved to Yellowknife up in the Northwest Territories. There was a case of arson, and for some reason he was picked up as a possible suspect. He was interrogated by the police. They discovered that he was totally innocent, had nothing to do with it at all. And they were about to release him when they realized that he had acknowledged that he had sexual relations with adult men, consensual and in private. And they said, well, that's breaking the law, and we're going to accuse you and take you to court. So George was dragged into court and accused of being an active, pathological homosexual. And the judge said, guilty. And they sent him to jail for life because they discovered or felt that he was a danger to society, a danger to kids, a danger to other people. And they said, will you swear that you won't engage in any homosexual activities? He said, I am a homosexual. What do you expect me to do? And they said, off to jail. They appealed it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court judges said, we wish it were different, but the law says into jail you go for the rest of your life. And that was when our Minister of Justice, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, recognized that something needed to change. And that was the initiative, the energy that led him in 1969 to decriminalize most acts of homosexuality, primarily for adults, consensual, private. There were a couple of things that were perhaps lacking, but it was that moment when Pierre Trudeau said, the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation. And I had this huge sigh of relief thinking, well, then I guess I'm not a criminal just by definition. I mean, I can still do awful things and go that way, but I am not by definition criminal. What I didn't know, and what perhaps many of us didn't know, was that during the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and almost into the early 90s, our government, on our behalf, was actively involved in purging the civil service, the military forces, and the RCMP of anybody who was suspected of being LGBT or Q. And they just kicked them out. Not a dishonorable discharge, but unemployable by reason of homosexuality was the term that was used. Not a don't ask, don't tell. They would send out spies to gay clubs, to hangouts where LGBT people might meet or dance or party or have associations. And then they would send them out. And goodbye forever. This just went on and on. I talked to some people in my congregation. There's a man, middle-aged, 65, Wayne, we'll call him. He was a budding and thriving RCMP officer. He loved what he was doing. He actually said it felt like a ministry. He was from Toronto. Friday night, he crept into a gay bar. On Monday morning, he was called into his superior's office, said, somebody saw you in a gay bar on Friday. You're fired. You're out. This was not uncommon. It finally came to a head with the case of Michelle Douglas. She was the top student at Royal Military College. People said, you are going to be groomed for top things. She was bright, she was courteous, smart, organized, efficient. And one day, they broke into her bedroom on the base and discovered love letters between her and her female partner. They kidnapped her, took her to a cabin out in the bush, no lawyer, no protection, no legal phone call, and they harassed her with non-stop 24-hour-a-day questions. You're a lesbian. Are you a lesbian? And not only that, you need to tell us the names of other people, other lesbians. And finally, she said, I am a lesbian. Do what you have to do, and I'm not giving you any other names. And they said, okay, you have 24 hours to tell your friends and family, and then we are going to publicly out you across the country as a lesbian who is now being kicked out of the armed forces. Which they did. Her parents didn't know. They were up in Ottawa, so she raced home in that 24 hours and said, Mom and Dad, there's something you need to know, because it's actually going to hit the press tomorrow. She coped. She was shattered. And then she said, I'm not taking this. And she took our government to court. It took 1989 to 1992, and she was found to have been incredibly mistreated. There were apologies given, and the purging stopped, and she won a significant financial settlement, and they started to develop a class action of the thousands of women and men that had been kicked out of the services, and there was a settlement around 2016, 2017 of $145 million that went to about 6,000 men and women who joined up for that action. So yes, 69, we've made a huge change, but we still kept acting as if this were some kind of horror show, the 70s and 80s, and finally it stopped. But it took us to 1996 before sexual orientation was read into the Charter of Rights. Remember how proud we have been about the Canadian Charter of Rights. It really speaks up for individual freedoms. But sexual orientation, gender identity, they were never included. And it took to 1995 that Jim Agan, from Toronto but had moved to Courtenay on Vancouver Island, and his spouse of some 40 years, Jack Nesbitt, took the government to court, because the Old Age Security Act of 1988 allowed for a spousal benefit. So Jim said, well, Jack's my spouse. We've been together for 40 years. What do you define as spouse? As somebody who lived with faithful sexuality, partnership, home, retirement? And they said, nope, 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 nope. They appealed it, went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, no, you're going to lose the case. However, it was a case or a situation of losing the battle, but winning the war. Because the Supreme Court said, according to the law, no. And the law needs to be changed. And in 1996, they read in sexual orientation and gender identity into the Charter of Rights. And it was one of those hallelujah moments. Like, we're here again. We have rights. Can't be fired. Can't be kicked out of the place where you live. Your kids can't be taken away from you. All the kinds of things that so many take for granted now are there. We were at the forefront of allowing marriages for same-sex people. Canada was the fourth in the world in 2005. Only the Netherlands, Belgium beat us, and Spain just snuck in a couple of months before we made that decision. It wasn't the first LGBT marriage. Sherry DeNovo, a United Church minister, did and celebrated the first gay marriage in Canada in the year 2001. And this is a funny story. It could only have happened in Ontario, because normally, as many of you, or all of you know, you go and you get a marriage license from the government, fill out the form, you hand it to the minister, and the minister will do what she or he will do, and the marriage happens. But in Ontario, they had not erased from the books the right to read bans. Remember that? You probably remember it from novels. If a minister gets up and says, I hereby declare the intention of these two people to be married. If anyone knows just cause why they should not be so married, I ask you to speak. And you need to do that 3 times. If you did it 3 times, then legally you could proceed, which is what Sherry did. They just skipped the whole marriage license because that department of government refused to issue licenses saying not legal, not allowed. But she got around that, 2001, did the first marriage. By the time our federal government got around to saying yes to marriage, well, 8 provinces and 1 of the territories had already made provincial or territorial decisions that marriage could be allowed and was legal. In some ways, our federal government was running to catch up, saying, oh, okay, you guys are ahead of us, but finally, legal. And it's just, you don't know the difference that makes. You think, I'm not criminal. In fact, I can be included. One of my highlights, I'm a firm believer in show and tell, in case you're getting bored with me. This is the official apology of the Government of Canada to members of the LGBTQ2S+ community. And I was invited to be a faith spokesperson on the committee that gave counsel to the Prime Minister as he and his associates and the Liberal Party put together an apology for the LGBT community. And it was one of the most profound and moving experiences. I remember when the draft document came out, they would not ship it by email because they did not want any leaks to occur. So it was wired to the federal offices in Vancouver, and I had to go downtown, show my identity, prove that I'm on the committee, I have a right to look at the document, give all my electronic devices. I was allowed a piece of paper and a pencil and absolutely nothing else. And they locked me into a room and said, you have 1 hour. And then at the end of that hour, they removed the paper from me and gave me my stuff back and said, you can go. But this then was offered on November 28th. My birthday was on November 27th. I thought, it's a birthday present for me. Happy birthday. The country is apologizing. And I even got 3 hugs from Justin Trudeau. And Gordon said, but aren't you an NDPer? And I said, yes, but I'll make allowances to hug Justin Trudeau. And I will vote strategically if and when necessary. So it's personally signed, and I'd love to read it, but too much time. I'd encourage you after if you want to take a look at that. But the first statement is, the number one job of any government is to keep its citizens safe. And on this, we have failed LGBTQ2 people time and time again. Sorry. One of the benefits of being on the council is that I was invited, taxpayers' expense, to fly to Ottawa and to be up in the gallery of the House of Commons and to be present when this was read. And I was surrounded by people who were supportive, and I don't know if there was a dry eye in the whole gallery. And one of the things that Justin Trudeau said at that point is that I have invited my 2 children to be present in the House for this day, because I remember when my father invited me to be present when the Charter of Rights was read out first. And I knew, though I didn't fully understand, what a significant day it was. And I want my kids to know how significant this is. It is with shame and sorrow and deep regret for the things we have done that I stand here today and say, we were wrong. We apologize. I am sorry. We are sorry. 5 years ago. Almost, well, next month. I was just checking out some travel information, and there are a number of LGBT travel booklets, resources. They name Canada as one of the safest and most LGBTQ-friendly countries in the world. There's been this huge change from 1967, when George went to prison for life, until where we are now. Oh, and just by the by, the law passed in 1969, but George had been found guilty under the law back in 67. He was not released until 1971. So he had another couple of extra years just to kill time before the government got around. But now, it's 2022, and there is some safety from the state, the government, politics. I won't be as long when I get to the medical. I mean, sick, sick. Catholics say, disordered, disordered. Even beautiful and wonderful Pope Francis, when asked if the church could bless same-sex unions, said no. Homosexuality is intrinsically a disorder, and therefore there can be no sacramental blessing through marriage of 2 people of the same gender. So, still sick, but an incredible study came out in 1973. A psychiatrist down in the States, Evelyn Hooker, did this incredible study and compared people of the same age, class, race, and some were straight, some were LGBT, and said, is there any discernible difference in their mental health? And decided, after much study, there was not, except for the fact that LGBT people did suffer mental stress precisely because of discrimination. There is nothing intrinsic, nothing inherent, nothing that said somehow being homosexual means you're sick. It does mean you're going to end up with an awful lot of prejudice and an awful lot of stuff to cope with, and that will often affect your mental health. Some of you also know how a number of churches engaged in what was called conversion therapy. And there was a belief that if you just hammered hard enough at a person, he or she could change his or her orientation. Well, absolutely not true. And I have dealt with a man who came into my office and said, I don't spend a lot of time in church. You don't even know me. But my partner, the man I've loved for several years, was so pressured by his family that he returned to his church where he used to go and entered into a program of conversion therapy. And after 6 months of that intense biblical medical attempt to change, he chose to kill himself. And I'm asking if you will do some kind of little service with me and a couple of his friends, because the family will have nothing to do with us, will not allow us to attend any service. They're still convinced that the conversion could have worked. Our country outlawed conversion therapy January of this year. Vancouver outlawed it in 2018. Couldn't change the law, but would not grant business licenses to anybody who professed a commitment to conversion therapy. So it's off the books, but frankly, I am worried that at some church level, it still happens. And so I just want to say, keep your eyes open and make sure that LGBT people here know that's not what the church is about. It will not be happening, and that they are safe. But this is a church gathering, sort of, maybe. Some of you may just be seekers, or you may have snuck in and sat in the back pew thinking, can I trust it, really? Or is he going to break into a biblical rant at any moment? And I will, but it'll be a different kind of rant. And I want to start by saying, of all communities, I don't get how churches are anti-LGBT and discriminatory, because there is no question that the God we claim we worship loves diversity. You take a look at our universe, and there is just so many trillions of this and that and the other. I love monarch butterflies. They're just beautiful. But did you know that there are 18,000 different species of butterflies? 18,000. God could have been content with one or two, but through evolution and through climate changes and movement around and tectonic plate shifting and who knows what else, 18,000. God loves diversity, revels in it, loves to see difference. And if we are ever wanting to follow Jesus, just think of the endlessly affirming ministry of that man, that prophet, that conduit of God's Spirit and love. He reached out to Roman centurions, the enemy. He reached out to women and to children and tax collectors and prostitutes and lepers and Syrophoenician women. I mean, there wasn't anybody that he didn't say, welcome, welcome. And if we profess that we are followers of Jesus, how can we do less? But we do, or we have, and we struggle with it. And I've spent a lot of time thinking, what is it about us humans that makes it so difficult to live with diversity and difference? So one of the first reasons I think we have trouble is just sheer ignorance. I mean, I've met people who say, I've never met a gay person in my life. And I want to say, oh, you have. You may not know it. They may not have told you, which says more about you than them. But you know them. No. Do I really? They're pedophiles, aren't they? No, they are not. Dum-dum-dum. There's just an ignorance which then spills into a discomfort or an actual fear, a fear of the other. And this isn't true just of sexual orientation. It's true of gender identity. It's also true of race and ethnicity and even inter or multi-faith. We are uncomfortable with differences. And then it spills a little bit further, because it's partly a question of self-esteem. If I recognize the things that I have taken to be true and solid, then what happens when I recognize there's an entirely different way of doing it? And it undercuts some people's self-esteem. I was ministering in the downtown east side when I was the minister at First United, that's Skid Row area of Vancouver. And I was out doing some street ministry in the evening, and there was a chap that was fairly inebriated, feeling his cups. Yeah, you know. And we got chatting a little bit. He didn't know me. I didn't know him, but part of the community, so was I. And he then at one point said, well, you know, I may be a drunk, but I ain't a fag. And I thought, oh, is that so? And thought, Gary, breathe deep. Okay, dear God, some people just need a little extra grace. He's what I'd call an extra grace required person at this point in time. And with your help, I can be supportive. But I recognized that it was like the pecking order. Things were rough for him, but at least he felt a little better because there was somebody who was worse. Sometimes we've used our discomfort with difference and magnified it deliberately for our own profit and power. So, for instance, the discomfort with people of different color allowed an entire rhetoric of enslaving black people, saying somehow that difference is to be put down. Jews were often persecuted or killed, and partly it was because they wanted their money. You read the history books of Europe through all the centuries, whenever the king, or occasionally queen, wanted more income, just expel the Jews. That happened 2 or 3 times in England. Expel them, confiscate all the property, all the money, and you get rich royally, and then in 3 or 4 years you can forgive them, bring them all back, they can earn more money, and then you can kick them out again another 30 or 40 years when they've earned a little more money. Well, I've heard from evangelicals in the States, if they're feeling that they need to run a good financial campaign, there's nothing better than saying, homosexuals are taking over the United States. They are preying on your children. They are trying to say that a man isn't a man and a woman isn't a woman. You need to give us money right away. And if you hold up the gay agenda, you can just raise money like that. And I sometimes sit back and said, I had no idea that I was that powerful. That, I get up and have breakfast in the morning, have a shower, put my books together, go off to the church, sometimes go to the gym, come home, cook supper, do the shopping, pick up the kids at school, take care of everybody, read stories, go to bed. Oh, yes, I forgot. Between 10 and 10:30, I enact the gay agenda and I take over Canada or the United States. I mean, give me a break. But it is used that way, and partly our society, and sometimes each of us individually, we love to have scapegoats. Hey, somebody who can be blamed. And we've seen this happen historically. I had a friend, Jewish, his mother said, you watch what they do to homosexuals in terms of oppression, arrest, or justice, because whatever they do to homosexuals, they're going to do next to us Jews. That we're usually the first in line because less powerful or so many people uncomfortable. People don't know how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of L and G and T and Q people died in the concentration camps. You know the power of the pink triangle. It wasn't just the Yellow Star of David where they massacred 6 million Jews. There were hundreds of thousands of particularly gay men who died in the camps as well. And then it goes even one further. It goes into what I would call projection. We are aware of deep, dark impulses in ourselves and how easy that is to project onto other people so that there is permission to harass, to bully, to call names, or eventually to move into killing. I think this whole discomfort with difference mixed with power and with comparison and self-esteem is at the root of some of the ethnic cleansing that we've seen happen in various countries, Africa, in the Balkans. We've seen it partly in China. We had ourselves done something close to that with cultural genocide, with residential schools, and our relations with indigenous brothers and sisters. I mean, there's nobody that's pure. And it's not looking at any one particular country, but it is saying we are tempted over and over to project and to put all the uncomfortable stuff inside ourselves. And who better to carry it than a lesbian, a gay man, a trans person, a bisexual? They're, disposable. So I want to say bravo to your journey for becoming an affirming congregation, because affirming work is not easy. It just isn't easy. When you look at that list, you think, what are we to do? So I don't want to end with negativity, and I have Several things I want to suggest. The first is patience. And I'm almost talking to myself. I want the change to happen now. But I've done some studying of change. They say for a person, an individual, to change her or his particular stance on a substantive, meaningful issue can often, if not usually, take up to 10 years before she or he changes their mind. For an institution, it takes maybe 20 years. And for a society or for a country, it takes 50 years. And so I would like to suggest that Canada's right on track. 1969, 2022, I think society has shifted. You look at the church, 1988, and now, yeah, we've made the change. But it does mean it isn't going to happen overnight. So you need to be patient and know that you're in it for the long haul. But at the same time, you need to be persistent, step by step by step, and never stop pushing. My spouse, my partner, was the first openly gay person to be ordained. I actually advised him to quit the struggle in the 80s because I thought the church ain't going to change. And I said, you're just banging your head against the wall, and I'm looking at the blood coming down. And he said, no, I can't. I can do no other. I believe that God is calling me. And I think that God is calling you to support me and God calling me to ministry. So shush up. And, patience and persistence. Okay, I get this. So as you begin this journey or continue this journey, hold on to those two words and then add a third P word, prayer. And I'm not going to say this in the Saturday night context with allies and other organizations, but I say it here because I truly believe that learning to pray with grace is another part of our journey. So a story. The end of General Council in 1988, which was like mainly the culmination with tons of fallout of the issue, there was a positive statement about the place of LGBT folk. A man that we'll call Jim, who comes from a very conservative congregation with a very conservative theology, who was clearly on the opposite side and we had voted differently, came up to me at the end as we were all getting ready to leave, and he said, Gary, I want you to know I'm praying for you. And I said, oh, Jim, if you are praying to God that I might somehow be saved and changed by Jesus, then I want you to take your prayers off my body. And he said, no, Gary, I'm not doing that at all. What I'm doing is I'm praying and just holding you up into the light and the love of God. I don't know where we're all headed. And he said, what I ask is, will you do the same for me? Don't ask that I change. Just hold me up into the light and the love of God. And I looked at him, and we both started to tear up a little because we were exhausted, and it was an emotional time. And I thought, not only can I do that, I want to do that. Just so that we can be brothers in faith, agree to disagree, but continue to pray for God's love to bathe and enfold each other over the times. And we did. I did. He did. And 2 years later, after annual meeting of what was then still called conference, Jim came and said, I need to talk to you. Let's go for coffee. So off we went. He said, I need you to know that last year, my son came out to me. He said, without you, without my church, without this United Church, I would have kicked him out of the family. But because of my church and the love of God, I was able to say, I don't understand. I love you. Let's talk. 2 years later, another annual meeting of conference. They're busy places. Jim to Gary, I need a coffee. Okay, what's up? He said, I just need you to know that last year I presided over my son's marriage. And I said, okay. Prayer does things to us. It gives us space. It gives us breathing. It gives us togetherness. And I remember at one time when I was at Ryerson United Church and we were struggling on whether to offer same-gender marriage. And the committee was totally in favor and ready to go for the vote, and they knew they'd win. But I said, I also know there are about a dozen people that I've talked to briefly who are opposed. Could we delay the vote by 3 or 4 months so there's more opportunity to talk? And they said, we'll give you 3 months. So as the minister, I went racing off, and some of those conversations were hard. All of them were prayerful. And when it finally came to the vote, near November, some 6 months later, it was unanimous, and nobody left. Prayer is important. The third thing is education. We need to do lots of education and to help people grow and learn more and more about homosexuality, to dispel some of the myths. I tell you, the number of times people have conflated pedophilia with homosexuality, it just makes me choke. And I want to say, here's a book. Go read. And there's so much to learn. When I was called to St. Andrew's Wesley United Church, became the minister there in 2005, the search committee interviewed me. They knew that I was openly gay, that I was married, and that I had raised children, and it would be different for them. And one of them was a very conservative man theologically. He and his wife actually taught at St. Andrew's Wesley a United Church version of the Alpha program that is one of the star, more conservative theological learning programs. And John said, I'm not sure I can support this. I need to go and read. And he's an ophthalmologist by background. And so as a firm believer in education, learning, went through the books, went through some biblical material, and came back the next month and said, I can support this. And when we had the congregational meeting, not we, they, with Presbytery's supervision, he got up and witnessed to that change of heart through learning and education, understanding the history, the sociology, the medical realities, as well as some biblical work that he had done. And it made all the difference. People are hungry to learn if we are willing to listen and to help them with resources. It also means that we might move into a different theological stance. One of my favorite little quick slogans that would actually make me believe in the possibilities of Twitter, I'm not on Twitter, don't even try, but the United Church of Christ, with whom we're in full communion, they're down in the States. They are sort of an offshoot of the uniting movement of the United Church of Canada. They have a little slogan that says, God is still speaking. And I can't think of almost anything better to say, things aren't locked. God is still speaking. There are ways of us understanding new ways. In new times, new challenges, God invites people to think differently, which means that we need to do some good biblical study as well. There are what a number of LGBT folk will call the big clobber texts. And if I'm in discussion with an evangelical who is a Bible believer, particularly a literal Bible believer, they will haul out the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, that's number one, 2 passages from I think it's the 18th and 21st chapter of Leviticus. They will then move to a passage from Timothy and from 1 Corinthians, and then they'll haul out Romans 1, 26 to 27. And I'm not going to bore you tonight, but I can tell you that none of those, except for the Romans one, has anything really to do with homosexuality as we understand it. Just as in passing, Leviticus, remember, it says, if a man lies with a man, as with a woman, he shall be stoned to death. Next line, if you eat shellfish, you shall be stoned to death. If you mix milk and meat products in kosher dieting, you shall be stoned to death. If you enter church and you are menstruating, you should be kicked out and stoned. If your child disobeys you, he or she should be stoned. Those are things we ignore. The only one we don't ignore out of the entire holiness code are the 2 statements about homosexuality. Those ones are important. The rest of the holiness code, it's Jewish. It's not Christian. And I think, do you not see what's happening? That you are whipping through the Bible and finding 4 or 5 little verses out of 2,000 pages to bolster a prejudice that you've arrived at from your social milieu. Nothing to do with your theological religious view. And I can get into real arguments, but I'll just say God is still speaking. And if you want to have a debate with me on biblical studies, I'll be glad to have it or point you to various resources. So, learning, patience, prayer, learning. The 4th is to recognize that often learning comes through storytelling. It's been one of the great gifts from our indigenous brothers and sisters in the whole Truth and Reconciliation movement of listening circles, where there is this incredible freedom of people telling their stories. And it goes for the heart. And it isn't just about here and learning new things in sociology or medical terms or even biblical study. It is hearing the story of someone who has struggled, someone who is faithful. I've had people come up and say to me, I don't know much about homosexuality, but when I think of gay people, they said, excuse me, but I think of you. You're the one face that I know. And somebody came up to me and said that Tim and I, my spouse, were at times known as Mr. and Mr. Gay United Church. I mean, it's a bit silly, and that's not an ego thing at all. It's that the power of someone telling her or his story is transformative for those who receive it with grace. It can come at a cost. I can remember during the educational process of the 80s that a number of people said, we can't tell our stories. We'll lose our jobs. We'll be fired. There were only a handful of people who were able to go out and to share with the church what they were about and to tell those stories. And so there's that chance of really trying to tell the story and really, really make a difference for other people. I want to backtrack because another thing that's very, very important is that there be an openness to the movement of the Spirit. God is still speaking. And I want to take you back to 1982. General Council was meeting in Montreal, and a number of lesbian and gay men, women, had been secretly forming little support groups. In Vancouver, there were about 6 or 8. Some in Halifax, a few in Montreal, a few in Toronto. In BC, we actually called it the Gays and Lesbians of the United Church of BC, a wonderful acronym that was pronounced as GLOB, which didn't really help people. But the invitation was to come together and talk. And at one of the evening breaks after the meeting had ended at 8:30, a dozen people went quietly up the stairs. Sorry, I must be moving around too much. I'm not moving. It's still doing it. Okay. Let me see if I can. Okay, I'll take a mic. Sorry. My apologies. So, okay, I'm going to speed this up a little, but this is one of the most amazing moments. I wasn't 1982, up into the it was literally an upper room, and that was the formation and the foundation of Affirm United. And everybody agreed on the name and then went back home, and there was no question that the Spirit was moving in an upper room reminiscent of a Pentecost moment where these women and men were so energized, said, we have each other, we have the Spirit, we have conviction, we have prayer, and we have friends. And so that whole movement of support for LGBT people emerged in 1982. 1984, the Spirit worked again, and all kinds of people who were not homosexual, but were supportive, were allies, were families, were friends, they got together and formed a separate organization called Friends of Affirm. Later on, those two would meld and come one, Affirm Unite, or l'Ensemble Uni. But nevertheless, in 1982, the Spirit moved. 1988, it was a big moment for the United Church. How do you even describe it? The issue, we all said, and we all wished that the issue would please God go away, and it wouldn't. And so eventually, a variety of reports had come out. 1980 was the first, In God's Image, Male and Female, a Study in Human Sexuality. And I was one of the trained facilitators that went out to church basements and did educational work. And one of the statements was homosexuality was okay, and people just freaked and said, oh, well, we'll just forget about that. Let's talk about the rest. 1984, another report came to the church, and it was saying, yeah, we should ordain LBG people. And the church said, oh, we're not ready for it. Let's have another study. And finally, the big study came out in January of 1988, and the church went crazy. Do you remember those moments when you read that, and it basically said they should be ordained, they should be included?
And the United Church General Council office received close to 2,000 resolutions or petitions that came from various congregations and presbyteries and conferences. 90% of them at least were saying thumbs down. And the way that the church decided to work with this material was what they called a sessional committee. Sessional committee was put together by General Council, and they met for the week before the beginning of the 1988 General Council in Victoria. And to be totally fair, they got 2 representatives from each conference, so 24, and they made sure that there was a balance of male and female, and there was a balance of liberal and conservative, so that the entire theological spectrum of the United Church was present in that committee. And they were tasked with reading the report, reading all the responses and resolutions, and coming up with something to say to General Council. Well, we knew about this committee, the entire church did, and bless my heart, my spouse Tim, he's in politics, he's a little pushy, he phoned up the General Secretary, Howie, and said, I need to know that there is an open and out gay person and a lesbian person on that committee. And he said, no, of course not. And then Tim said, would you have a committee deciding on the role of women and have nothing but men on the committee? No, said Howie. Would you have a committee that would decide what should happen for people of color and black people to be decided by white people? No, said Howie. Then how in heaven's name do you think a group of 24 straight people, or at least if they aren't, they're not saying, decide on the place in the role with not one gay or lesbian voice to speak up? Oh, said Howie, let me think about that. And Howie's a really good guy, bless his heart. And so he made a decision in consultation with the General Council staff that there would be one gay person, that turned out to be Tim, and one lesbian person, turned out to be Alison Rennie, and they would not have a vote, but they would be ex officio and available to speak and to respond to questions. So the committee came together, and all 24 of them went marching in, plus Tim and Alison, and all of them had the report, the pile of 2,000 resolutions, and many of them had their Bible on top. Dum, da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. They did a poll. 6 were for it, and 12 were against, and the rest said, I don't know, I'm open. And Marion Best was the facilitator and the chair of that committee, and she said, we are going to work by consensus. And Tim sagged, because consensus means all 24 members have to agree. And he said, that's going to be impossible. We know that. He said, I know some of the people. It's not going to happen. And that committee worked for the week. They worked, and they worked, and they worked, and they prayed, they cried, they listened, they fought, they pulled out more Bibles, they talked, prayed again. And I still to this day, and now that it's Tim, know how it happened, because they came up with a unanimous decision, which was neither to accept nor reject the original report, but to put it to the side as an historical document. And then they came up with a much smaller, succinct statement, the core of which said, all people, regardless of sexual orientation, who believe in Jesus Christ and are obedient to him, are welcome to be or become full members of the United Church. And that means that they are eligible to be considered for ministry. And all 24 said amen to that. Normally when the sessional committee reports, only the chair goes forward to bring forward this response. The members of the committee were convinced that it was important that they all stand on stage, because they believed that the General Assembly would not believe that this had happened. And so 24 of them, representing liberals, progressives, liberals, conservatives, right-wingers from right across the country, came and said, we support this statement that all people, regardless of sexual orientation, can be members if they're following Jesus and can be ordained. Well, the conference exploded. It was not what anybody was expecting. And the debate went on and on and on. And I swear to you, the Spirit was there in that gymnasium at the University of Victoria. I saw it, I felt it, I heard it, and they took a vote finally in the wee hours, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, on the next to last day. And they said yes by a margin of 3-1. 3-1. The church exploded, as you perhaps know. I understand that here a number of people left. Many churches lost members. Some churches lost more than others. You need to know that statistically only 25,000 people left the United Church, which was only 2% of the present membership. 2% said, I cannot live with this. The rest said, I'm not comfortable with this, but I can live with it. I want to give you one more story because there was one of the members of the committee who, I won't say name or place or anything, but he had been voted in as a delegate or commissioner because he was so adamantly opposed to the report. And when he got home, his wife said, you will publicly, from the pulpit, renounce your vote and say you were swayed by emotion or something. And she said, otherwise, we're finished. And he said, I can't. And she said, you will. So he wrote out a sermon and got up in the pulpit and got halfway through. And then he said, I can't do this. I don't believe what I'm telling you. What I am going to tell you is the Spirit was present in Victoria, and I was convicted by the Spirit, and that's why I voted in favor, and I can do no other. At which point, his wife got up from the front pew, walked out of the church, and on Monday began divorce proceedings. That's how passionate people were. Pro, con. As far as I know one of the parties, happy ever after, rebuilt, much pain. I'm not sure of the other half. Just to let you know how deep that was. But there are those spirit moments that come. I was one of the people to lay hands on Tim when he knelt and took his vows of ordination. And it was a tingle, unbelievable. And, well, as Gordon said, I was elected to be the first openly gay moderator in 2012. I had not wanted to be moderator at all. Some people had approached me. I said no. I had discerned. I'd gone off for prayer, and I said no. And then a number of things happened, and I finally said, okay, God, enough. Will you just shut up? I will agree to let my name go forward as a nomination. Your response has got to make sure that I don't win. Do we have a deal? And God laughed and said, just go for it. We'll see what happens. And I was elected. And Tim and I on the plane home spent the whole journey back in tears, saying, what have we done? And just to let you know, the United Church was the first denomination, significant denomination, other than Metropolitan Community Church, which serves the gay and lesbian community, the first denomination in the world to elect an openly gay leader. I mean, we are pioneers. In 2015, we chose to elect the first openly lesbian moderator for the United Church. I mean, this is some remarkable church that you and I and so many others are part of. So there are these spirit moments that I want you to be open to in your journey and in your personal life and your communal life as church, as congregation. I'm going to speed up. 10 words instead of 1. Let's cut it down to 8 words instead of 1. I want to talk about the power of affirming congregations. Congregations that stand up and say, you're safe here. We are welcoming here. We celebrate LGBTQ2S people and that they can be themselves. And I have heard stories just from last night of people in this congregation who have felt that love and that kind of acceptance. Affirm United put together the whole affirming congregation movement around 1992. In 1995, St. Augustine was the first United Church in Winnipeg to become an affirming congregation. And by the end of that year, there were 5 scattered across the country. And the United Church General Council National, a few years later, said, we are going to bless this as an official United Church program. There are still only about, at least according to the stats on the web, about 200 congregations that are affirming. That's only 10% of the United Church. And I keep saying, I don't get it. Why aren't we at 100%? Now, the reality is that many congregations are in practice affirming. They just haven't gone through the official process or program to then get the label and the good seal of housekeeping. But it is an excellent process of education and awareness that is so helpful. I actually did a quick lookup, and you know that there are, I think 9 congregations in Edmonton that are affirming, 14 in Calgary that are affirming, and 14 scattered throughout the scattered throughout Alberta. So that's the Chinook and Mountain and Northern Spirit. So I'm not quite sure how many. But as far as I gather, you are going to be the first congregation in Alberta north of Edmonton to say we're seeking to become a safe place. And just a wonderful thing. 3 or 4 of the regions are becoming affirming. And in fact, Northern Spirit region, the one in which St. Paul's is located, has brought a report saying we probably will become that. It's been very difficult to do that with COVID, as everything else has been. But they are having a meeting early in November. And check the web, because it's an online meeting just for conversation and for various congregational members to actually do some sharing about where they are in that process. So that's important. The next thing I want to say is PIE, good old P-I-E. A congregation or a community needs to be public, intentional, and explicit about your welcome. So I want to tell you a funny story, because I was called to be the minister at St. Andrews Wesley, January of 2005. The church was a little uncomfortable. About 20 people had left in protest. Some of them would come back later. And I thought, don't push things, Gary, just don't push things. But I thought we should be in the Pride Parade. We had never been in the Pride Parade. And I pictured, let's have a car, maybe a banner, maybe a few pamphlets, maybe a dozen people. So I asked this friend who was in the congregation, who was a real go-getter. I said, Don, see what you can do. He came back to me next week and said, well, Gary, I've approached 3 or 4 people in the congregation, and I have a budget. You don't have to worry about budget. There's a couple $1,000. I've rented a 46-foot flatbed truck. I've organized a committee, and we are now building a replica of St. Andrews Wesley United Church, complete with stained glass windows. I have talked to the stewardship committee, and I have permission to take 4 pews and to bolt them down onto the back of the truck. Okay, I said, okay. He said, yes, I have convinced the gospel choir to sing upon said float that you were thinking might be just a car. And I have actually now booked a recording studio on the North Shore, professional, so they will record their hottest and most lively gospel tunes, and then they can sing along with, but we'll have volume and a secure voice at the parade. I said, okay. And so we gathered, and there were 82 people marching in the float from ages 2 up to 82. People in their 80s tended to want to be on the float, somewhere on a pew, not necessarily to sing. We rocked the place. And this is the funniest story, and I don't often tell this part, but I must admit, I put in a prayer to God saying, please, God, just make sure that our float is not beside one of the raunchy nightclub floats where there might be naked men. Oh, please, because if that goes on TV, I might as well resign. And God said, I hear you. No naked men. But right behind us was WAVA, Women Against Violence Against Women. And they are a strong and passionate and incredibly important group in the city. Often run some of the homes for women who are racing and trying to hide from abusive partners and domestic violence. They believed in going topless, except for small pasties. And they wanted to hold on to a broom so that they'd be in a straight line. And they loved our gospel music. And so they went walking. And every person who may not have been gay, every man, was watching them, as well as our float. And I said, God, you have a way of answering prayer in the weirdest kind of way. But I just want to let you know that they won first prize in the float, top float. The next Sunday, 3 different families joined us. One was a gay couple. The other 2 were straight with children. And I said, oh. But they said, we want our kids to be in a congregation, a community of faith, that is open, respectful, and welcoming and loving. And when we saw that, we said, this is where we need to be. This is where our kids need to grow up. And one of the realities is, because of that stance, Russell, whom I met when he was about 6 or 7, is now in his mid-20s, is a happy gay man who credits the church enormously for saying role models, support, love, not sick, criminal, and sinner. And Sarah went through a struggle of becoming Michelle and now is Mitch and transgendered and has felt love. And her father just died, and the whole congregation came and was celebrating with him at this point in time. It matters. It matters. We have painted our steps at the front, right on Burrard, wild rainbow colors. I gather it's wash-off paint because during the end of September, the steps all became orange for, Orange Shirt Day. But they have a saying that says, and they painted it on the stairs, and they then turned it into T-shirts saying, no matter who you are, no matter who you love, all of you is welcome here. And in my past life, I was an English teacher. And I think all of you is welcome. No, all of you are welcome. You is plural, isn't it? And they said, no. The whole trick is all of you, the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, the gay, the straight, the orientation, the gender identity, your talents, your voice, whatever you have, all of you is welcome here. And so our volunteers now wear this T-shirt and say, all of you is welcome here, all of you is welcome here. And it is just a wonderful, wonderful statement. There are so many ways that a congregation like you folk, you can be public, intentional, and explicit. Shaughnessy United Church. Shaughnessy is perhaps the richest area of Vancouver. It tends to have a lot of lawyers and doctors, and it's got a reputation of being hoity-toity. They have some new ministers now. And they decided to put an art installation on the front lawn. They got old doors from old houses and then painted them in rainbow colors. And on each door they had a word, all doors. No. God's love is for, God's doors are open for all people. God's doors are open for all people. And then at the end they had one final door that was full-on rainbow colors. The rest were single. So they put this up proudly. The congregation said, yes, this is good. Overnight, night number 1, somebody came up and poured white paint all over the doors, which turned out to be the work of the Spirit, because it meant that CBC was down there that afternoon filming, interviewing, and the whole neighborhood swamped the church with emails and phone calls saying, we are embarrassed. That is not what we are about. We support your church. And we support that statement of welcome. There are ways, and you know what works in this community, there are ways of trying to celebrate and let it be known. I think your outside sign that keeps switching back and forth, it's just marvelous. It's one of the ways. I know that some of the people on the Affirming Committee went off and then visited various LGBT groups in the community to say, this is happening, you're welcome. That's what tomorrow night is about, trying to let the whole community know something is happening at St. Paul's United Church that could be transformative for all of Grand Prairie. Last night when we were listening to some representatives from PFLAG, Parents and Families and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, somebody said, is Grand Prairie a safe place? And the response was, depends when and where and how you walk. It's mostly safe and sometimes not. And so there is work to be done, and a place to proclaim this as loudly and as proudly as you possibly can, and make this kind of public statement available for everybody. And there are many ways where you can build alliances within the larger community. I know one church that said, hey, to a community LNG group, there's space here, yours for free. I know a community in one of the suburbs of Montreal, they did an exploration and tried to say, we are supportive, found out that LGBT people were not allowed to bring same-sex partners to the prom. It was just taboo. We will not have that. And so the church threw an LGBTQ youth prom the day before, the day after, I don't know which, and said, you're welcome to have your prom dance here. You may end up going alone to the official school one or with some buddies, but here you can be with your date. Like, who knows if that's important everywhere, but for them, that was an important piece. The church in BC became really involved in many ways with the SOGI curriculum that was developed, sexual orientation, gender identity, the one that has been outlawed in Florida, don't say gay at all. And I don't know what the status is here in Alberta. I didn't have an opportunity to check it out. But you might want to check it out and say, is SOGI part of the curriculum that allows age-appropriate material and information and support to be offered to children? I know the importance that my kids found when we first found a book that says, what was the title? Somebody, Sarah has two daddies. And we just treasured that book and said, oh my, it was so important. There is further work that needs to be done because we've been a lot focused in the last 50 years on L and G, lesbian and gay. And we've discovered how the trans community is facing even more oppression and more hatred and needs support. And the United Church has come forward to say, okay, we will be there. I also need you to know that the United Church is involved in trying to be a global support partner for churches around the world. We are not wanted to come in as former colonial types and tell other people what they should and should not do. But we are able to fund special events. We fund a runaway home in both Uganda and Jamaica for LGBT youth who are needing to flee for their lives' protection. It's run by local church partners, not by us, but we provide the funding. And we have funded 2 different conferences, one in India, one in Africa, where ministers and lead lay people have come together at our expense, and they talk among themselves about what their church should or should not do concerning LGBT inclusion rights. It's called the Global Solidarity Fund, and it's been around since 2021. It's a way for our church to recognize that in at least 70 countries in the world that LGBT activity is outlawed and can bring you right to jail, and that in at least 6 or 7 countries, if you are engaged in anything to do with LGBT, even a supporter, you face death. And sometimes it has been enacted. And I know of someone who was beaten up terribly in an unnamed African country, just precisely because of that. So I'm saying to you, there is work to be done. And it can be global, it can be local, it can be within your own region. And there are 5 to 10% of the people of the world who need you to be there. So I'm going to finish with one final story. When my kids were little, I would sing them a special lullaby. It's called Everything Possible by Fred Small. And it was a lullaby that was affirming and loving and that they so enjoyed. And when Tim and I finally were able to celebrate our love and our existing partnership of 20 years in a church wedding, at the reception, our 3 daughters, Kate, and Emily, and Zoe, who at that time were in their 30s, they got up in front of everybody and they sang this lullaby to us. And I'm not going to sing it, but treat it as a poem. We have cleared off the dishes, the leftovers saved. Washed the dishes and put them away. I have told you a story and tucked you in tight at the end of your knockabout day. As the moon sets its sails to carry you to sleep over the midnight sea, I will sing you a song no one sang for me. May it keep you good company. You can be anybody that you want to be. You can love whomever you will. You can travel any country where your heart leads and know I will love you still. You can live by yourself. You can gather friends around. You can choose one special one. And the only measure of your words and your deeds will be the love you leave behind when you're gone. Some girls grow up strong and bold. Some boys are gentle and kind. Some race on ahead, some follow behind, some go in their own special way. Some women love women, some men love men. Some raise children, and some never do. You can live all the day, never reaching the end of everything possible for you. Don't be bothered by taunts, by names or games, but seek out spirits true. If you give your friends the best part of yourself, they will give the same back to you. Oh, you can be anybody that you want to be. You can love whomever you will. You can travel any country where your heart leads, and know I will love you still. You can live by yourself. You can gather friends around. You can choose one special one. And the only measure of your words and your deeds will be the love you leave behind when you're gone. Will be the love you leave behind when you're gone. Amen. And thank you for listening. That's for the singing, isn't it, Alan? Oh, jeez. I wasn't going to sing. My very first church, on week number 2, a couple members of the congregation came up to me and they said, Gary, you have an excellent singing voice for a minister because it's strong enough to hold the tune, but not so good that anybody would be embarrassed about singing with you. Which I thought, oh, okay. That was sort of a backhand compliment. So, friends, at this point, we are open for comments or questions or stories. I think there was an invitation if you wanted to write on pieces of paper, then Gord would collect and read, or to just speak out where you are. Gord will help facilitate and run around with the mic. And let me tell you, I have been doing this, as you said, for a long time. And so there's almost no question that is a bad question at all. Just ask whatever is on your heart or your mind.
Apparently they're all shy.
They're shy.
And if you believe that. But one of the questions because it's one of the ones that has come up in many an affirming process. Early in our process, the affirming team had a pie with some questions on it, and one of them was, what worries you about engaging this process? And one of the ones which came up in a couple of the responses I saw was to the effect, because we've all heard the stories of the affirming churches who put the rainbow flag up and are vandalized. The story about the doors, for example. The church in Fort Saskatchewan has had multiple pride flags stolen this year, which just made Paul Wallfall really mad and really insistent that they were going to find some way it wasn't going to get stolen again, because Paul is a strong-willed man.
He is indeed.
Paul's
Share the
sure
good news.
As a congregation, I know the default here, because they've told me, is, oh, if somebody comes by to complain, we'll just send them to Gord. Which works fine, except for the time during my holidays when somebody came to the door and our office admin caught it. But how is it the best way to respond? Because all of the ones we've had come to our door, we're pretty sure came from the same church, and we were pretty sure the church sent them. Mm-hmm. We don't have proof, but the office admin and I have strong suspicions. Mm-hmm. What's the best way to respond?
I'm of two different minds. One is to lift up the example that I shared with the very conservative minister, Jim, and to invite those people into praying for each other, to say, let's not pray specifics. Will you hold us in prayer up into God's love and light, and can we do the same for you? That there's that kind of power in prayer. The other side of me wants to take them on and say, okay, let's have a public debate. Are you up for that? And I don't really mean that, because that often ends up with losers and winners. But if I were at Fort Saskatchewan, I would make sure that the flag was put on the very top spire, and you'd rent ladders so that, in fact, it would fly proudly, but it wouldn't be there. I mean, it wouldn't be accessible to vandals. So there are sometimes ways around the issue by making sure it can't happen. So, for instance, we have a shelter at the top of the stairs at the church that I'm at, and it's become a favorite sleeping place for the homeless. But then it moved to become a drug center where all kinds of drugs were being sold. So they thought they'd install a water so that if somebody stayed there for more than X amount of money, the water would pour down. Well, it lasted 2 days, and then that was broken. So anything, I mean, so you try various things that might work practically. The other is to go to the community. I mean, that's what I meant when Shaughnessy, actually, I think the ministers told me later they were almost grateful for the vandalism because it then showed the community some of the church's struggle. And then they discovered there were a huge number of people that were on side supportive, though they hadn't articulated that before. So a letter to the editor, perhaps? I don't know. There is no easy answer. The other is to say, yeah, sometimes when you're taking a road less traveled, there will be some troubles. We follow someone who said, pick up your cross and follow me, which I never thought was the best winning line to bring in more people. But it feels like there's a real truth in it, that there may be some cost.
Well, and some other guy said something about foolishness to the Gentiles and Jews, and you know.
Yes, yes.
You're not all that shy.
Do you have a pride parade in Grand Prairie?
Actually, they've never done a parade here. The local pride folks for the last several years, but of course with 2 off because for some reason the world shut down, has done. They do a family carnival.
Ah, okay.
They started the first couple of years in the parking lot over at the college, and as it got bigger, they've moved and do an event in the field house at our multiplex. So they do like I say, they've done it, at least 5 of them, at least 2 over there and at least 3 in the, and for the last 3 carnivals, we have had we have set up a table and had a booth, and indeed did have, especially the first year we were there were people just falling down from shock.
Okay.
That there was a church there.
Yeah.
I mean, and we have built through that and through the work over the last year and a half. We've built a good relationship with the Pride folks. But yes,
Okay.
So we don't have a parade. We have a carnival.
Sounds great. Sounds like
There's
you're
much
there.
less traffic disruption.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. You could paint your steps rainbow colors, but make sure it washes off easily enough.
I just think that one of the things that's really interesting is it's not just United Churches that are becoming affirming. I've listened to services that have been done in Calgary, and there are a variety of churches who are taking part in those events. And if you go online and look at the churches all across Alberta and across Canada, there are many other denominations who are picking up and going, hey, yes, this has validity. They appreciate the education piece that's in it and the steps and the process that's all been put together. And other congregations and other faiths are using that same process to fly the pride flag and the emblems of the Affirming Church.
Yes. That's really important. I think that the United Church was a pioneer, and within this country, the Anglican Church has now made a positive decision, Presbyterian Church and the Lutheran Church as well. On the other hand, the Methodist Church on a global level is ripping itself apart at the moment, and the worldwide Anglican Episcopal community likewise. They are starting to having to choose sides, which is so sad. I had an Anglican friend, the dean down at the cathedral in Vancouver, who in about the year 1990, 95, came up and said, "Oh, I wish we'd been walking with the United Church in 1988 so we could have got this over with and proceeded further." But you're right, there are other denominations, and people are open. When I was moderator, one of the traditions is the moderator go to church partners around the globe. Your primary purpose is to listen to the stories and then bring the stories back to Canada, to churches, to say what we're doing through M&S is important and we're empowering partners. It was time for the moderator to go to Africa, and our African partner said to me, via the appropriate channels, "Don't come." And I said back through the channels, "Listen, I am not like a one-trick monkey, an axe to grind. I do not have to talk about sexuality at all." And they came back and said, "Of course not. We know that. We've read up on you. But you are so publicly out for the people that are willing to make a scene that it will be publicized and in the papers. And anybody who talks to you will be in danger once you leave. So leave us alone, help us do our own work." Our partners in South America said, "Please come. Oh, and by the way, don't just come to listen to stories. Could you please bring your spouse, and would you tell the United Church story of becoming an inclusive community? Not telling us what we should do, but simply sharing your story." And I did. And it was with the Methodist Church in Colombia. And they have just in this last year ordained their first openly lesbian minister. And they have shifted. And I remember being at this huge gathering, and people sort of looked at me with interest. And I was not telling them what to do, but I was pointing out possibilities of different biblical interpretation. And one woman at the back stood up and said, "Bishop, sounds like you've got some work to do. You're the one that taught us how to read the Bible that way. Sounds like you got to teach us something new." And I thought, my work is done. My work is done. It's between Madam So-and-so and the Bish. And they did. They engaged in conversations. So storytelling and other denominations, absolutely. This is a partnership venture. At this point, I start to warn people, you better ask me a question because, I mean, there's another 30 minutes to go and you don't want to listen to me talk for another 30 minutes. Oh, my word. Because I have stories. Oh, have I got stories. Good.
When you were listing prayer, persistence, and prayer education, and maybe this falls under the education wing, but it seems like the more people we get to know who are gay and lesbian, or the more we love them.
Yeah.
I mean, I know. I'm wondering what you think of this process. A minister was called to one of the churches in Northern Lights Presbytery. The search committee knew that he was gay, but they didn't tell the congregation. They let him come, and he was loved by everybody. Not because he was gay, but just because he was a great man, great preacher, and pastoral person. I don't know if that was a wise decision, but it worked.
You raise a very good question, because one of the realities that each person needs to make a decision on her or his own when is the right time to come out. And there are so many stages. You come out to yourself, you come out to family and friends, you come out to co-workers, you come out to the public. And sometimes, like, there were a number of years that I lived in what I called a glass closet, so that anybody who looked at me would know. I mean, I'd be at a church meeting and be sitting side by side with Tim, who was 1,000% out. It was dangerous to sit with him. But I needed my own time. So when I went to First United, I told the search committee and I told all the members of the board, and anybody that joined the board, I sat down, but I did not make a public statement. I look back and think I wish I had. When I went to my next church, I told the congregation, you need to tell everybody up front before the meeting that I'm gay and that I'm married or partnered. And then Tim said, and you want permission to live in the manse. I said, I don't want to live in the manse. He said, I know, we probably won't move, but if they're willing to live with the consequences of the decision in the community. And so they did, and bless their hearts, the manse committee took us on a tour and said, we're a little uncomfortable, but we support you. So I'm at the stage in my life where I need people to know beforehand, so there are no surprises. I know other people that have been discreet and have told search committee or the board and haven't told everybody. I think it can go both ways. Because of my own experience, I tend to say I think you should share it, because people could feel that they'd been duped or caught by surprise or caught unaware. And so it could have, and if in fact the congregation is going to reject you because you're gay, then maybe that's not the right place for you at this time. But it's hard to know. I know that when I was at Ryerson, we had a receptionist volunteer system to ease the work of the secretary. And so this one woman, Dory, older, lovely woman, but conservative, she had a call that came in from my partner, Tim, and she just chose to listen in on what we were talking about. And I heard this only because she went to talk to the secretary after, and she said, Gail, I listened to their conversation. I know I shouldn't have, but I just couldn't resist. They're just like us. He talked about the kids, who's cleaning up the house, who's cooking dinner, who's doing the shopping. It was just like any conversation I'd have had. And that just spread like wildfire. They're just like us. They're worried about the kids, the groceries, the house, and so it was a wonderful moment, though I was at first taken aback, thinking, thank you, God, that we weren't talking about who knows what. And many people, about 20 people left Ryerson, and only 3 who had sort of burned their bridges and took a public stance so vehement. The rest came back. They sort of watched me from a distance and said, oh, he's actually an okay guy. He's, quote, just like us. So it works both ways. I do know that when we were leading up to 88, the difficulty for some people of coming out when they knew they might lose their job or their reputation or perhaps their family, it was very, very difficult. Yet we also knew that telling stories, as you said, when you know somebody, you love them, or you hear their struggle or their pain, and you're full of compassion and more understanding. And then there's the solidarity. There is the community of faith where you support each other. So blessings on that congregation, and may they find the right way through. Good question.
In discussion about the church holding this Affirming Week, someone asked, why are you putting LGBTQ plus folk on a pedestal? Why can't they just live their lives? Why do you need to do all this? How would you respond?
It's the reason I make a fuss is precisely because when I was younger and then all the way up to my 30s, I knew that in fact I wasn't welcome. It was other people's opinions and judgments, and that still continues in many circles, particularly religious circles. And so I'm really just wanting to get on with my life, to take care of the kids and the meals and the shopping. But other people insist on making it an issue when I don't necessarily want to. So it's not a decision that LGBTQ plus people have. And I know it smacks of wokeness or political correctness. The number of initials keeps growing. And now the official one, I think, in the United Church is 2S hyphen for two-spirited people, comes at the beginning, 2S LGBTQAA plus. No, AI plus, asexual, intersex. And I think, oh, give me a break, Lord. I'm feeling old. But it's not that they're trying to upset the apple cart and say, look at me, pay attention to me. They're saying, this is a group of brothers and sisters that I know that have been pushed to the edge, and up until the 60s, 70s were considered criminal, sick, and sinner. And so how do we change that so that you have the potential to be healthy and free and offer your gifts to the larger community with grace and with love? So I'd say it is, here's a story. This one comes from somebody that I met when I was moderator who had been a commissioner at the General Council of '88, the big decision General Council. And he had been voted in to make sure that it did not pass. He was quite conservative in his views, from Southern Ontario. And he said, I went to the conference and I watched the Affirm table, and then I strolled by the, Renewal Fellowship Congregational Concern table, or the Covenanting. Thank you. And he said, at the Affirm table, I saw people crying and being held and praying together. And at the other table, I saw people angry and in debate and really upset. And I kept asking myself over the course of 3 or 4 days, which table would Jesus hang out at? And he said, I found myself, against all the things that I thought I knew, that I was moving to this table. Meaning that there is anger and upset in some members that is hurting the life and the love within the community and focusing on blaming or scapegoating, I think, another particular group, the LGBTQ group. And so I think we're almost at the point in Canada and here in our congregations of the United Church being able to say, I think we have weathered this. That there's been a transformation. The 10, 20, 50-year change process has happened. It doesn't mean there isn't more work, and there are still groups, and I'm still learning. My oldest grandchild declared a year last July that they are now non-binary. And I thought, I'm cool, except I keep messing up the pronouns. And then when the birth name was given up and a new name was chosen, I wanted to say, but I loved your name that you had for 16 years. And so I've got a lot to learn. And I realized that this young 16, almost 17-year-old is hurting, is upset, is trying to find a place. And I want there to be communities of love and acceptance for them as they try to figure out what this journey will hold. They don't know. All they know is that they're confused. And they don't want to fit into neat gender stereotype categories. Or another little story that just shows you again, in Vancouver, I shared this last night, a number of the gay groups were celebrating a significant anniversary, the Little Sisters Bookstore, the gay choir. And so people came and said, we want the city to declare this a special year. And the city said, sure, what shall we call it? And the young people who were organized said, we're going to call it the Year of the Queer. People of my age said, no, that's a horrible word that was used to oppress, to mock, to bully. And they said, you're old, you've got white hair. Thank you for doing a lot of the fighting. Move over. This is the Year of the Queer. So it was interesting to realize how quickly I could be hooked and say, stop trying to draw attention to yourself. Don't use that word. And they said, no, we're reclaiming it for ourselves. And so it was announced, and that's what was declared. And you could look at the feedback that the city received. I know because my spouse was a city councillor for 20 years. And anything that was against the Year of the Queer was coming from older people. And those who were celebrating were all younger. So you realize there's more and more to learn.
I'm not quite sure what my question is, but in part of this process that has been a gift is hearing stories from folks that have trusted us and joined us at meetings and stuff and have told us their stories. And the thing that has shocked and hurt and surprised and appalled me is the people right here that are just neighbors in Grand Prairie who have been hurt deliberately by churches. They've been sucked in by a bait and switch, in not at St. Paul's, but certainly in Grand Prairie. So they've been pulled in, been encompassed by what looks like Christian community, and then basically not termed conversion therapy, but then told, well, they're welcome except, or they're welcome but, and they just need to change this or change that. And I'm wondering about healing ministries, like what can our role be? Because that's, and I mean, that's why we need to say, not just all are welcome. We need to say, gay, lesbian, trans, whatever, two-spirit. We need to say out loud, because it's people who have been hurt, and they look at our church just the same as all those other churches that have done the, oh yes, we are a loving Christian community, and then caused harm.
That's an excellent comment, and my grief is that it is an accurate description of some branches of Christianity. A member of our congregation came from such a church, and when he came out, he was rejected by family, kicked out of the church and all his friends. He found a new family within St. Andrews Wesley, but it almost came too late in his life, and 2 months ago we celebrated the end of his life through suicide. It was just too much for him, that the kind of harm done. Now, there were other extenuating factors. That's partly why it's important to be public, intentional, and explicit, so that other people in the community know that this is a different church. And there are other churches. I would seek out allies in the community to partner up with the Anglican Church if it's really feeling like it can be affirming, or the Lutheran or the Presbyterian, to say there is a whole branch of Christianity that is not condemning. And when I was moderator, the General Secretary, Nora, would constantly say, now Gary, you may have strong opinions, but you keep them to yourself because you are the moderator. And I finished my term and I said, now, as of January the 1st, 2016, can I really announce to the world what I think about some branches of Christianity and Stephen Harper? And she said, no. You are still the past moderator now, so you need to be astute. But sometimes I lose my cool, and I want to say I see too many churches spreading what I call bad theology and bad biblical study, and that they are not following in the way of Jesus. And I get particularly incensed and scared at what I see south of the border, where in fact I think Jesus has been hijacked for a right-wing agenda. And I can't just get away by saying, I'm a Christian. I've spent a lot of my life saying, I'm a Christian, but I'm not that kind of a Christian. I'm a Christian, but I'm not that kind. But I want to now say, I'm a Christian, and I'm struggling for the rights and the freedom of all people, which means I sometimes have to challenge fellow Christians, but to do it in love, not that my anger lead me, but to be present and say, no, I disagree. I disagree with that. Can we talk further? So we have our church right across the street from the Baptist church. The first minister was there that announced to me, just sort of wrote a note saying, because you are now there, we will never ever worship with you again, and I don't want to have a conversation. Period. So I thought, okay, I've got enough on my plate anyhow. The next one was much more open, and so we went for several coffees and talked. And he said, I think we could do many things together, but I need you to know that I'm actually not affirming. And I said, okay, I can live with that, but how do we work together? And so we had a good working relationship, only he went a little too far because he was committed to interfaith and sent the youth group to join with some Muslim youth. And that was just a bridge too far. And so he was asked to leave. So, but to look for partnerships, to make the voice hear loud and clear and loving, and to, one of the things that I've said, I think I might be even saying this on Sunday morning, but somebody lifted up the image of the way to lead is with a soft front and a strong back. So that there's the softness and the welcome, but there's also the commitment, and you know where you stand, but you stand in the name of love, and not. So I think my desire to attack or to state too loudly is not helpful. It's not going to lead any of us closer to God. It'll just escalate the fight. So I have to keep looking for ways of engaging with people who disagree with me and with whom I disagree in a way that is productive. I don't want to become self-righteous myself and say, I've got all the answers, you guys are all wrong. I want to say, how do we act in love? But you're right. You want to hear one more story? There was a man whose name was Frank, and he headed up the conversion therapy program out in Burnaby with the Something Christian Fellowship, the most active conversion therapy center in the province, and dealt with all kinds, primarily younger men. And he was the counselor, the guide, and he himself had experienced conversion in Jesus, so he was no longer gay, except that he was still gay. And finally he broke down and shared with the minister and his wife and friends that for all of his praying, he was still gay. And his wife said, leave. The congregation said, leave. And so Frank went off and was lost and ended up coming down with AIDS. Tim, my spouse, was ordained in 92, but no church would have him. So the national church, bless their hearts, said, we ordained you in good faith. That's a long story, but they said, we will pay you a salary, but we want you to do volunteer ministry. So he became the first chaplain on the AIDS ward in Vancouver and bumped into Frank, who was there for palliative care. And they had long conversations, and Frank wept and said, how do I find forgiveness for what I've done to so many people? And Tim said, well, I can put you in touch with the religious editor of the Vancouver Sun, Doug Todd, and you can tell your story. Would you be willing to do that? And Frank did, and basically said, I repent, I was wrong, I hurt so many people, I hurt myself, and I asked for God's forgiveness. And he died a week later. But he read the article in the paper. It was a full-page article. He was a good man who got lost by the rhetoric of one particular interpretation of Christianity. Yeah. Going once. People saying, please, I can smell the coffee. I had coffee this morning and said, wouldn't it be great if we could just inhale coffee like we do air, so I wouldn't have to worry about racing to the kitchen to get my first cuppa, or at the end of a long talk, my next cuppa. So unless there are more questions, I'm going to say we've probably come to the end. And I'd like to just close with a quick commissioning benediction. A wise person said, friends, we do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those we travel with. So be swift to love and make haste to be kind. The hand of God to hold you, the grace of God enfold you. For the love that dreamed and formed you still surrounds you here today. May the light of God be with you, beside, above, and within you. The light that shines to lead us all home to the loving heart of God. Amen and amen.
Thank you, Gary. A reminder that Gary will be, we've got coffee and treats at the back, so you can have some coffee and conversation this evening. Gary will also be available for tea. I think we'll have more than just tea, but tea tomorrow afternoon for the everything you wanted to know but were afraid to ask discussion. Yep. And Gary will be moderating a panel discussion right here tomorrow night at 7. We'll have, how many panelists do we have? Do we know that for sure? Okay. Just so I know what I'm setting up for in a moment. And again, thank you very much, Gary. And Gary will also be preaching on Sunday morning.
And it'll be different from what I said tonight, I think. I'm pretty sure. A different poem. But just as an aside, any question really is okay. Vancouver has a partner relationship with Kingston, Jamaica, and some journalists were up, and they are wrestling hard with the LGBT question in Jamaica, and they've come out on the side of being not very accepting. And these journalists gathered and had a chance to meet with Tim, who was a city councillor, and me. And they said, is it okay if we just ask any question? Because we actually don't have permission to ask these at home. We said, anything goes. So about the second question, they said, which one of you is the woman? So that took a little while to negotiate and then to figure out how to respond. And I said, well, actually, neither. We could prove it. And they said, no. Anyhow, we had a really fruitful discussion about roles and partnership and what that looks like. And they said, well, who cooks? Well, we both cook. Well, who shops? Well, who took care of the kids? So, like, what sounds insulting, I mean, I've heard it all. And it just sort of washes off. So if there's I was going to ask them, the title to be, everything that you wanted to ask about sex in the United Church and faith, but were too scared to say so. And they said, we'll just take out that middle part. It didn't fit. It was too long. So just anything you want to ask.
Again, why use one word when 10 will do, right? Exactly. So, again, Gary, thank you very much this evening.